Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Georgia. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time at which you're listening to this narration. We're interested to know which places and what times of day or night these documented stories reach. The year was 1844, and Augusta, Georgia, stood as a testament to the wealth of America's South. The grand estates and sprawling plantations that bordered the Savannah River reflected the prosperity built upon the backs of countless souls. Among these estates, none held more whispers than the Henderson property at the edge of Richmond County, where a stately manor home sat perched upon the hill, overlooking acres of cotton fields. From the main road, travelers could glimpse the white columns gleaming in the Georgia sun, but few knew of what transpired beyond the wrought iron gates that remained perpetually closed to uninvited guests. February 19, 1844, a date that would be recorded in the ledgers of the Richmond County Courthouse as simply another transfer of property. But what the ledger failed to capture was the transformation that would overtake the woman who stood before the judge that day. Eliza Henderson, newly widowed at 32 years of age, dressed in the traditional black mourning attire that society dictated, signed her name with a steady hand as she claimed her inheritance. The official record would note that Mrs. Eliza Henderson became the sole proprietor of Henderson Estate following the untimely death of her husband, Jonathan Henderson, a respected businessman and plantation owner. What no record captured was the subtle curve of her lips as the quill scratched against parchment. Jonathan Henderson had been found dead in his study 3 weeks prior, slumped over his desk, with a glass of bourbon at his fingertips. The county doctor declared it heart failure, a common enough occurrence for a man of 45 who indulged in rich foods and finer liquors. The funeral was modest by Augusta standards, just family and close business associates gathered at St. Paul's Episcopal Church. Notable was the absence of tears from the widow, though none would dare comment on such an observation. Grief, after all, manifested in many forms, and Eliza Henderson had always been known for her composure. According to the church registry from St. Paul's, preserved in the Georgia Historical Society archives, Jonathan and Eliza Henderson had been married for just 7 years before his death. The registry noted that Eliza came from the Blackwood family of Savannah, daughter of a shipping merchant who had lost his fortune in the financial panic of 1837. The marriage had been arranged quickly following her father's ruin, a not uncommon fate for daughters of fallen businessmen. What the registry couldn't record was the coldness that had characterized the union from its beginning. Sarah Millhouse, who served as lady's maid to Eliza for the first 3 years of her marriage and later provided testimony to the Richmond County Historical Society in 1865, described a household devoid of warmth. Mrs. Henderson addressed her husband with perfect politeness, Millhouse recalled, but I never once witnessed any genuine affection between them. They maintained separate bedrooms from the first week of their marriage, meeting only for meals and when entertaining guests. Mr. Henderson seemed content with this arrangement, often absorbed in his business affairs. Mrs. Henderson, however, watched everything: the household accounts, the business ledgers, the operations of the estate. She observed it all with those piercing eyes, never missing a detail, though she was careful to appear merely decorative when guests were present. What public records fail to mention is how Jonathan Henderson's business associates exchanged glances during the reading of the will, how the late Mr. Henderson's lawyer, Thomas Whitfield, paused several times during the recitation, his throat inexplicably dry, as he announced that the entirety of the Henderson holdings would pass to Eliza, with no conditions or oversight. Those present might have recalled the slight shift in the room's atmosphere, a collective inhalation of surprise quickly masked by proper decorum. Women rarely inherited such extensive business interests without male trustees to guide them. According to a letter later found in the personal correspondence of Mr. Whitfield, dated March 1844, the lawyer expressed concerns about Mrs. Henderson's immediate interest in the financial ledgers. She inquired not about household accounts as one might expect, Whitfield wrote to his brother in Savannah, but rather about the valuations of every person owned by the estate and their respective skills. Her questions were pointed and revealed an understanding of commerce that I confess I did not expect from Jonathan's quiet bride. When I suggested that her cousin Edward might assist in managing these complex affairs, she regarded me with such a look of contempt that I found myself unable to continue the recommendation. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, "I have observed my husband's business dealings for 7 years. I have reviewed every ledger, every contract, every bill of sale. Do not mistake my silence for ignorance. I require no man's guidance." The Henderson estate was substantial by any measure. The main house, with its 12 rooms and imported furnishings, 300 acres of prime agricultural land, a cotton gin, warehouses near the river, and ownership of 47 enslaved persons. In the economic language of the time, these human beings constituted the most valuable portion of Jonathan Henderson's wealth. What was unusual, and what would later be discussed in hushed tones among Augusta's elite, was how quickly Eliza Henderson grasped the business operations that her husband had built over 20 years. County records indicate that within 1 month of Jonathan's death, Mrs. Henderson had not only maintained all existing business contracts, but had expanded them. The Henderson cotton shipments continued without interruption. Warehouse ledgers recovered decades later showed that by April 1844, shipments had increased by nearly 15%. Augusta's business community, initially skeptical of a woman's ability to manage such affairs, found themselves reluctantly impressed by the widow's acumen. The Augusta Chronicle, in a brief business notice published on April 12, 1844, noted, "The Henderson cotton concern continues to thrive under the unexpected stewardship of the widow Henderson, who has demonstrated remarkable aptitude for commerce. Recent shipments to Liverpool have commanded premium prices, securing the Henderson name among our region's most reliable exporters." What the Chronicle failed to mention was the growing unease among those who dealt directly with Eliza Henderson. The widow conducted business with a precision that some found unsettling, negotiating terms with a coldness that even hardened businessmen found disconcerting. But it was the first purchase made by Eliza Henderson that raised eyebrows among those who tracked such transactions. On March 23, 1844, she attended an estate auction following the death of Colonel James Wilkinson. Among the items listed for sale were household furnishings, carriages, livestock, and 12 people. Mrs. Henderson purchased all 12, paying above market value. When questioned about the extravagance by Mrs. Sarah Caldwell, one of Augusta's prominent socialites, Eliza reportedly replied, "One must invest to see returns, Sarah. My husband understood this principle, and so do I." The auction record preserved in the county clerk's office listed the 12 individuals purchased by Mrs. Henderson with clinical detachment. Joshua, age 32, blacksmith, 1,200. Marcus, age 28, carpenter, 1,100. Samuel, age 35, skilled in leather work, $900, and so on. What the record didn't capture was the unusual nature of Eliza's selections. Each person she purchased possessed a specialized skill, not field workers as might be expected for a cotton plantation, but craftsmen and those with manufacturing expertise. More curious still was Eliza's behavior at the auction, as described in a letter written by Josephine Wilkinson, the colonel's daughter, to her aunt in Charleston. The widow Henderson examined each person with the cold scrutiny of a livestock buyer, asking detailed questions about their abilities and training. She showed particular interest in those who had worked in my father's workshops rather than the fields. When she spoke to them, it was directly, with no overseer as intermediary, asking about specific techniques and processes, as if interviewing for a particular position. The entire display was most unusual and prompted much discussion among those present. What the society columns and public records couldn't capture was the transformation occurring at Henderson Estate. The property, which had once hosted summer socials and holiday gatherings, gradually became more insular. Invitations ceased. The gates remained closed. Workers delivering goods reported being met at the edge of the property rather than being allowed to approach the main house, as had been customary during Jonathan's time. Eliza Henderson continued to appear in Augusta for business matters. All was impeccably dressed in mourning black, long past the expected period, but social appearances dwindled to obligatory attendance at church services. Margaret Sinclair, who served as housekeeper at the neighboring Fairview Plantation, reported in an oral history recorded in 1868 that the Henderson estate underwent subtle but significant changes in the months following Jonathan's death. The main house, once welcoming with lamps in every window at dusk, began to appear shuttered and dark, she recalled. The grounds, previously immaculate, showed signs of redirection of labor to other priorities. Most noticeable was the construction that began behind the main house, beyond the original quarters. New structures appeared, solid and windowless. When questioned by my employer about these changes, Mrs. Henderson merely replied that she was modernizing operations, whatever that might have meant. By summer of 1844, rumors began to circulate about changes at the Henderson property. Neighboring landowners reported hearing unusual sounds in the night, the clanking of metal, raised voices, and occasionally cries that seemed to be cut short. When approached directly, Mrs. Henderson dismissed such accounts as the sounds of expanded cotton processing operations that now continued through the night to meet growing demand. A journal belonging to Dr. William Hayes, the physician who had pronounced Jonathan Henderson dead, contains an entry from June 1844 describing a house call to the Henderson estate. Called to attend to an injured worker at Mrs. Henderson's request, he wrote, "Found the man, Samuel, with a severe laceration across his back, inconsistent with the explanation of a fall against farm equipment. When I inquired further, Mrs. Henderson dismissed my concerns with remarkable coldness, stating that the man was valuable property and she merely wished him treated so he could return to work. Her manner gave me considerable discomfort, as did the conditions I glimpsed in the quarters behind the main house. I saw what appeared to be new construction, solid wooden structures with small, barred windows. Mrs. Henderson did not offer to show me these buildings, and something in her demeanor prevented my inquiry. The doctor's observations coincide with county permit records, showing that Eliza Henderson had indeed filed for construction of what were described as additional storage facilities in April of that year. The permits were granted without inspection, as was common practice for established property owners. What these buildings actually were would become clear only months later. By August 1844, a pattern had emerged that caught the attention of Thomas Whitfield, the Henderson family lawyer. According to his private notes recovered in 1965 during the renovation of the Whitfield & Sons law offices in downtown Augusta, the widow Henderson had begun to systematically purchase specific enslaved individuals from neighboring counties. Mrs. H. continues to expand her holdings in human property, Whitfield wrote, but does so with a selectivity that puzzles me. She seeks out those with particular skills, not field workers as one might expect for a cotton operation, but rather those trained in crafts, blacksmiths, carpenters, those with experience in mining operations in the northern counties. More curious still is her interest in acquiring those with knowledge of languages, particularly those who served as translators or clerks. She pays premium prices and conducts these transactions with a precision that suggests a plan beyond mere agricultural expansion. Whitfield's notes also reference a meeting in late August, where he questioned the financial wisdom of these purchases. I suggested that her capital might be better preserved through investment in additional land or equipment, rather than in human chattel whose value could depreciate through age or illness, he recorded. Mrs. Henderson regarded me with such a penetrating stare that I found myself unable to continue my counsel. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, "you fail to understand the business I am creating. My husband saw only the land and what it could produce. I see the true source of wealth in this country. It is not cotton, sir. It is people and what can be extracted from them. This conversation marks a turning point in how Eliza Henderson was perceived by those who conducted business with her. Merchant records from September and October 1844 show orders placed for unusual supplies, additional iron, specialized tools typically used in smithing and leatherwork, quantities of chain and lock mechanisms, and imported dyes typically used in textile production. One order placed with a pharmaceutical supplier in Charleston listed substances used in both medicinal and industrial applications. A receipt discovered in the archives of Donovan's General Store in Augusta, dated September 18, 1844, listed items ordered by Mrs. Henderson that included 12 pounds premium-grade iron, 3 sets specialized smithing tools, imported, 4 specialized cutting implements, 2 crates assorted lock mechanisms, 6 bottles chemical compounds, as per separate list, 8 pounds imported indigo dye. The receipt bore a notation from the proprietor. Mrs. Henderson insisted on inspecting each item personally before accepting delivery, rejecting several pieces as below standard. Her knowledge of metallurgical quality exceeds that of most craftsmen I've encountered. The business community of Augusta, while perhaps privately disturbed by the widow's methods, could not argue with her results. By the harvest season of 1844, Henderson cotton was commanding premium prices for its quality. The warehouses by the river were consistently full, and shipments departed with remarkable regularity. On paper, the Henderson estate was flourishing. Samuel Thornton, a cotton broker whose correspondence with associates in Liverpool was preserved in the Maritime Collection at Savannah Harbor Museum, wrote in October 1844. The Henderson product continues to arrive with consistency that rivals clockwork, clean, properly graded, and packaged with exceptional care. When I complimented Mrs. Henderson on the improvement in quality since her assumption of management, she offered the barest acknowledgment before directing our conversation to price negotiations. It was as if the cotton itself held no interest for her beyond the capital it generated, most unusual in a planter who typically takes pride in the crop itself. What remained hidden from public view was the nature of operations beyond the cotton fields. According to a deposition given in 1868 by Isaiah Johnson, who had been purchased by Eliza Henderson in April 1844 and later escaped to the north, the storage buildings on the property had been converted into workshops. Each building had its purpose, Johnson testified. In one, men worked metal from dawn until past midnight, forging small components that we were never told the purpose of. In another, women wove distinctive textiles to exact specifications. Mrs. Henderson would inspect the work personally each evening, rejecting any piece that failed to meet her standard. Johnson's testimony, preserved in the archives of the American Anti-Slavery Society, described a system more akin to a factory than a plantation. "We were not field hands anymore," he stated. "We became machines ourselves, each assigned to create specific items that were collected weekly and taken to the warehouses by the river. Those who excelled were given better quarters and food. Those who failed to meet the quotas were subject to Mrs. Henderson's discipline, which was administered in a room in the basement of the main house. What happened there, none would speak of, but those who returned walked differently thereafter." Johnson's account continued with disturbing detail about the specialization of labor within the Henderson workshops. "I was assigned to the metal shop based on my experience as a blacksmith," he stated. "For 14 hours each day, I created small metal components, precise discs with intricate patterns, specialized tools that resembled engraving implements, plates with reversed lettering that made no sense to me at the time. Others in my shop created specialized inks using chemical compounds. We were forbidden to speak of our work outside our assigned building. Those who did disappeared. What Isaiah Johnson could not have known, and what would only be revealed through customs records discovered in 1907, was that Eliza Henderson had established a sophisticated export operation that extended far beyond cotton. Shipping manifests from November 1844 show crates leaving Augusta bound for New Orleans, Charleston, and even overseas to Liverpool, containing items listed simply as manufactured goods. The true nature of these goods remained undocumented, but their value was considerable based on insurance values recorded. A letter found in the personal effects of Richard Covington, a shipping agent in Savannah, suggests that Mrs. Henderson had developed contacts in multiple ports who distributed her goods without asking questions about their origin. The widow's merchandise continues to arrive with precision, Covington wrote to an associate in New Orleans. The quality is exceptional as promised, and the clients are most satisfied. How she produces such items at such rates remains her closely guarded secret, but I find it best not to inquire too deeply. The commission is generous enough to warrant discretion. The letter continues with a disturbing observation. I did once make the error of questioning a discrepancy in the manifests, where 12 crates were listed departing Augusta, but only 10 arrived in Savannah. Mrs. Henderson regarded me with such stillness that I felt a chill despite the August heat. "Mr. Covington," she said, "our arrangement prospers because you concern yourself only with the goods that arrive at your warehouse, not those that may be directed elsewhere. Let us maintain that understanding. I have not raised such questions since." By December 1844, Eliza Henderson had expanded her property holdings to include a warehouse in Augusta proper, purchased from a merchant facing financial ruin. According to city records, the building underwent extensive renovation, including reinforcement of doors and the addition of iron bars to windows, ostensibly for security. Local laborers hired for the work reported being allowed to complete only certain portions of the renovation, with Henderson's own workers handling the interior modifications without outside witnesses. Jeremiah Crawford, a carpenter who participated in the early stages of the renovation, provided an account to the Augusta Chronicle in 1867 after the warehouse had been demolished. "We were hired to reinforce the outer walls and install new doors, solid oak with iron banding," Crawford recalled. But once the exterior work was complete, Mrs. Henderson brought in her own people to finish the interior. We were paid well and dismissed. Later, I observed wagons arriving at night, delivering supplies and equipment that seemed excessive for a simple storage facility. Most curious was the installation of what appeared to be individual cells within the main space, small chambers with separate locks accessible from a central corridor. When I inquired about this unusual design to the overseer, I was told my services were no longer required and escorted from the property. The nature of these modifications would remain unknown until 1859, when a fire in the adjacent building led to an emergency entry of the Henderson warehouse. According to the report filed by Fire Captain Michael Donnelly, what they discovered defied explanation within the context of normal commerce. The building contained divided chambers, he wrote, each set up for some manner of production, with tools chained to workbenches and sleeping pallets attached to the walls. The chambers had no interior door handles. Most disturbing were markings on the walls, tallies and words scraped into plaster that suggested the occupants tracked time in their confinement. We found the building unoccupied at the time of our entry, though evidence suggested recent use. Donnelly's report included sketches of the layout and notations about items discovered, specialized printing implements, distinctive paper stock with watermarks similar to those used in banknotes, metal plates with reversed text, and quantities of chemical compounds. The report concluded with an observation that was surprisingly prescient. The configuration of equipment and materials suggests activities related to the production of documents requiring security features, such as financial instruments or legal papers. The nature of the confinement facilities indicates labor conducted under duress rather than voluntary employment. The fire report was filed but generated no investigation. By 1859, Eliza Henderson had become one of the wealthiest property owners in Richmond County, with connections extending to city officials, judges, and legislators. The warehouse was repaired and operations continued. What remains most disturbing in tracing the rise of Eliza Henderson's business empire is the calculated nature of her expansion. County records show that between 1844 and 1848, she acquired 3 additional properties in Augusta and 1 in neighboring Columbia County. Each followed a similar pattern of renovation and security enhancements. Tax records indicate increasing profits year over year, with her business interests diversifying beyond agricultural production to include what was vaguely termed specialized manufacturing. A bank ledger from the Augusta Mercantile Bank, preserved in the state archives, shows that Eliza Henderson's deposits grew from $12,000 in 1844 to over $87,000 by 1848, an astronomical sum for the period, particularly for a business ostensibly based on agricultural production. More telling still was her pattern of transferring funds to banks in Charleston, Savannah, New Orleans, and even New York, creating a complex financial network that would have been unusual for any business owner of the era, let alone a widow operating independently. Notably absent from any public or private record is evidence that Eliza Henderson ever remarried or sought male companionship of any kind. She maintained her widow's attire and status, which perhaps afforded her a degree of independence, unusual for women of her era. Business associates described her in correspondence as formidable, precise, and occasionally unsettling in her attention to detail. One cotton broker from Charleston wrote that negotiating with Mrs. Henderson was akin to playing chess with an opponent who has already calculated every possible move and countermove. One has the distinct impression that she views all interactions as transactions where advantage must be gained. Her personal life remained equally enigmatic. The staff at the Henderson estate, while expanded to accommodate growing operations, included no close confidants. According to testimony from house servants recorded after the Civil War, Mrs. Henderson maintained a rigorous daily schedule, rising before dawn to review ledgers and correspondence, conducting business meetings throughout the morning, and personally inspecting workshop operations each afternoon. Evenings were spent in her study, often until well past midnight, with strict instructions that she was not to be disturbed. Martha Green, who served as cook at the Henderson estate from 1842 until 1851, provided rare insight into the widow's personal habits in a statement recorded by the Freedmen's Bureau in 1866. Mrs. Henderson ate sparingly, plain food, no indulgences, never touched spirits, though the house maintained a well-stocked cellar for guests. She slept little, no more than 4 hours each night as far as any of us could tell. The only personal item I ever observed her to value was a small silver locket she wore beneath her clothing, never visible to others. Once, when I entered the study unexpectedly, I found her holding it open, studying whatever was inside. She closed it immediately upon noticing me and dismissed me with unusual sharpness. What was in that locket I cannot say, but it was the only time I ever saw anything resembling emotion cross her face. The true extent of Eliza Henderson's operation began to emerge only through scattered documentation and testimonies that survived the Civil War. A ledger recovered from a hidden compartment in the desk of the former Henderson estate overseer, Samuel Wright, contained entries that shed light on the nature of the specialized manufacturing. The ledger, now preserved in the Georgia Historical Society, detailed production quotas for items including forged document seals, distinctive textile patterns identical to those used by certain banks for currency, specialized inks and components that, when assembled, could produce printing. Plates. Wright's ledger revealed a production system of remarkable sophistication, with specialized workshops creating components that, when combined, could produce convincing counterfeit currency, bonds, land deeds, bills of sale, and various legal documents. The ledger tracked not only production, but also the performance of workers assigned to each task, with notations about those who excelled and those who failed to meet standards. Most disturbing were entries regarding disciplinary actions and occasional notations that certain individuals had been reassigned or removed from inventory, clinical euphemisms for fates that can only be speculated upon. Historians now believe that Eliza Henderson had established what would today be termed a counterfeiting operation, but one of remarkable sophistication and scale. The specialized skill she sought in her purchases of enslaved workers served this operation. More disturbingly, the operation expanded to include the forgery of various legal documents, from bills of sale to land deeds and possibly even freedom papers that were sold at high prices but would not withstand official scrutiny. According to analysis by Treasury Department historians in the early 1900s, counterfeit banknotes matching the production methods described in the Henderson ledgers were discovered throughout the southeastern United States in the late 1840s and early 1850s. These counterfeits were noted for their exceptional quality, with paper texture and ink formulations nearly identical to legitimate currency. The counterfeiters had mastered the intricate engraving patterns used by banks to deter forgery, creating notes so convincing that they circulated undetected until banks began to notice discrepancies in serial numbers. The full scope of Eliza Henderson's criminal enterprise might never have been discovered had it not been for the persistence of Thomas Whitfield. His personal journals, which remained sealed as part of his estate until 1915, reveal a man increasingly troubled by his client's activities. Entries from early 1845 show his growing suspicion that the Henderson business interests had expanded into illegal territory. I find myself unable to reconcile the volume of income reported by Mrs. H. with the visible operations of her estate, Whitfield wrote in March 1845. The cotton production, while excellent, cannot possibly generate the capital she now commands. I have observed shipments leaving her warehouses under cover of night, bound for destinations not listed in any official manifest. When questioned, she offers explanations that, while plausible individually, form a pattern that strains credulity when viewed collectively. Whitfield's journals track his cautious investigation conducted without the knowledge of his client. He noted unusual patterns in Henderson shipping operations, inconsistencies in reported goods, and, most significantly, the disappearance of several people who had business dealings with Eliza Henderson that turned contentious. Harmon Wells, who publicly accused Mrs. Henderson of undercutting cotton prices last autumn, has reportedly relocated to Tennessee with no forwarding address, Whitfield wrote in June 1845. Similarly, the bank clerk who questioned one of her deposits has taken unexpected leave to care for family in Virginia. Most troubling is the disappearance of young Frederick Allen, who worked briefly in her Augusta warehouse before departing without collecting his wages. 3 individuals, connected only by their challenging interactions with Mrs. H., all vanished within the span of 8 weeks. Whitfield's journal entries grow increasingly anxious as his suspicions deepened. In August 1845, he wrote, "I have today observed something that confirms my worst fears regarding Mrs. Henderson's operations. While reviewing property transactions for an unrelated client, I discovered a deed bearing the signature of Judge Carleton for the sale of timber rights in Columbia County. The document appeared entirely legitimate, except for one detail. I had dined with the judge the very evening the deed was purportedly signed, and he had mentioned traveling to Savannah that day. Upon closer examination, I detected subtle differences in the signature compared to other documents bearing the judge's hand. I fear Mrs. Henderson has expanded into forgery of legal documents, a crime of the most serious nature." Subsequent entries detail Whitfield's internal struggle between his professional obligations to his client and his growing moral discomfort. "I have advised numerous clients who relied on documents processed through Henderson Holdings," he wrote in September 1845. "If these papers prove fraudulent, the consequences would be devastating not only to those directly affected, but to the stability of commerce throughout the region. Yet, to accuse a client of such activities without absolute proof would constitute a grave professional breach. Whitfield's concerns culminated in a decision that likely cost him his life. In October 1845, he documented his intention to approach the county sheriff with his suspicions. "I can no longer reconcile my professional obligations with my conscience," he wrote in what would be his final journal entry. "While I have no definitive proof of wrongdoing, the pattern suggests activities that may threaten public safety and order. Tomorrow I will speak with Sheriff Dawson privately regarding my concerns." Thomas Whitfield was found dead in his office the following morning. The official cause was recorded as apoplexy, though the doctor's report noted unusual bruising around the neck, dismissed as the result of how the body was positioned in death. With Whitfield's death, official scrutiny of Eliza Henderson's operations ceased. A curious document discovered during the renovation of the old courthouse in 1938 suggests that Whitfield's death was not as natural as officially recorded. A preliminary investigation report, never filed officially, included testimony from Whitfield's clerk, who reported seeing a woman matching Eliza Henderson's description leaving the office late on the evening before Whitfield's body was discovered. The report was marked "Inquiry Terminated by Order of Judge Wilson," a name that appeared in Henderson's ledgers as having received considerations on multiple occasions. For the next 15 years, the Henderson business empire flourished in plain sight, while its shadowy underpinnings remained hidden. Eliza Henderson became known as one of Georgia's most successful businesswomen, her methods questioned, but her results undeniable. She expanded her property holdings throughout the 1850s, acquiring additional land in Georgia and investing in properties as far away as New Orleans and Baltimore. According to bank records preserved from this period, she maintained accounts in multiple states under various business names. A journal kept by William Barrett, a bank director in Augusta from 1848 to 1856, provides insight into how Henderson managed to avoid scrutiny despite the scale of her operations. Mrs. Henderson has cultivated relationships with remarkable precision, Barrett wrote in 1850. She has extended loans to judges, provided investment opportunities to law enforcement officials, and made timely donations to the campaigns of politicians. More notable still is her knowledge of personal indiscretions among the city's elite, knowledge she never explicitly leverages, yet somehow ensures those individuals remain favorably disposed to her interests. It is as if she has constructed a web of obligation and fear that renders her untouchable by conventional authority. The complexity of Henderson's operation extended to her distribution networks. Maritime records from the port of Savannah show regular shipments from Henderson warehouses being loaded onto vessels bound for multiple destinations, ostensibly containing cotton and manufactured goods. Customs inspections were cursory at best, often conducted by officials who had financial relationships with Henderson Enterprises. One customs official, James Mercer, provided testimony in 1867 to a Reconstruction Committee investigating corruption in Georgia ports. Mercer stated, "It was understood among inspectors that Henderson shipments were to receive minimal examination. Those who insisted on thorough inspection found themselves reassigned or dismissed." The arrangement was never explicitly stated, but was enforced through a combination of bribes to supervisors and threats to those who failed to comply. The threats were particularly effective because they often involved personal matters that no one wished to see exposed. The Civil War brought significant changes to the South's economy, but historical records suggest that Eliza Henderson had anticipated the conflict. Banking records from 1860 show substantial transfers of assets to accounts in New York and even London. When war erupted in 1861, the visible Henderson operations in Augusta continued, now producing goods for the Confederacy, while the more clandestine aspects of the business appear to have expanded northward ahead of the conflict. A ledger discovered in a Charleston bank vault in 1906 revealed that Henderson had begun liquidating Southern properties as early as 1859, converting landholdings to gold and negotiable securities stored in Northern and European banks. By the time federal forces approached Georgia, she had secured her wealth against the inevitable economic collapse that would accompany Confederate defeat. During the war years, Henderson's Augusta operations shifted to manufacturing goods needed by Confederate forces: uniforms, leather goods, and various metal implements. These legitimate enterprises provided cover for the continued production of counterfeit currency, now including Confederate notes. The irony of counterfeiting currency that would soon be worthless regardless was not lost on Henderson, according to a letter found among her papers. The temporary nature of this currency makes our work simultaneously more simple and more profitable. Standards have declined with necessity, and detection is unlikely when authenticity itself has become a relative concept. What is perhaps most remarkable about Eliza Henderson's criminal enterprise was its invisibility to most observers. In Augusta society, she was viewed as an eccentric widow who had successfully managed her husband's business interests through determination and intelligence. Her continued wearing of mourning attire, her avoidance of social gatherings, and her focus on business rather than remarriage were seen as personal oddities rather than calculated choices that served her purposes. An article in the Augusta Chronicle from 1855, highlighting successful businesses in the region, described Henderson as a testament to the resilience of Southern womanhood, maintaining her late husband's legacy through diligent management and innovative approaches to traditional industries. The article noted her contributions to local charities and her patronage of St. Paul's Church, creating a public image that effectively concealed her criminal activities. The few who glimpsed the truth rarely lived to share their observations. According to testimony given in 1868 by Mary Wilson, who had worked as a house servant at the Henderson estate, at least 4 people who had gained knowledge of operations beyond the main house disappeared between 1845 and 1850. They would be called to meet with Mrs. Henderson in her study, Wilson testified, and then they would be gone. She would explain that they had been sent on business to other properties, but they never returned. We knew better than to ask questions. Wilson's testimony included a particularly disturbing account of an overseer who had questioned Henderson's orders regarding the workshop operations. Mr. Daniels had been with the estate since Mr. Henderson's time, she recalled. He expressed concerns about the conditions in the workshops, particularly the hours and the punishments for those who failed to meet their quotas. He was summoned to the study one evening in August 1846. The next morning, Mrs. Henderson informed the staff that Mr. Daniels had been reassigned to the Henderson properties in Louisiana. His personal effects remained in his quarters, including a locket containing a portrait of his wife. No man would voluntarily leave such an item behind. The full extent of Eliza Henderson's crimes began to emerge only after her death in 1865. According to official records, she died of typhoid fever, though rumors persisted that she had taken her own life as Union forces approached Augusta. In the chaos of the war's end and Reconstruction, many of her properties were abandoned or seized. It was during this period that evidence of her operations came to light. Union soldiers occupying the main Henderson estate discovered hidden rooms in the basement where, according to military reports, they found evidence of confinement and implements of discipline inconsistent with legitimate business operations. Similar discoveries were made at her Augusta warehouse and at properties in Columbia County. Most significant was the recovery of financial ledgers that detailed transactions spanning over 20 years. Captain James Morton of the Union occupying forces described the basement rooms in his official report, dated June 1865. Below the main house, accessible only through a concealed entrance in the study, we discovered chambers that can only be described as cells. The walls bear evidence of restraints, and implements found within suggest interrogation and punishment rather than mere confinement. Most disturbing was a ledger discovered in a locked cabinet detailing sessions with individuals who had apparently displeased Mrs. Henderson. The clinical nature of these entries, recording methods used and responses observed, indicates a methodical approach to causing suffering, that chills the blood of even seasoned military men. These records, partially preserved in the University of Georgia archives, reveal the mechanics of what historians now recognize as one of the most sophisticated criminal enterprises of the antebellum South. The ledgers tracked not only production quotas for counterfeit currency and forged documents, but also detailed accounts of blackmail operations targeting prominent citizens, evidence of bribery of public officials, and, most disturbing, a notation system that appeared to track individuals who had been removed after becoming liabilities. A forensic analysis conducted in 1923 by Treasury Department investigators examined soil samples taken from the area behind the former Henderson estate where, according to several witness accounts, unusual nighttime activities had been observed throughout the 1840s. The analysis revealed elevated levels of chemical compounds consistent with those used in dye production and paper treatment, key components in currency manufacturing. More disturbing was the discovery of quicklime deposits in areas where outbuildings had once stood, suggesting a method of disposing of evidence, or possibly human remains, that left minimal traces. A letter found in 1954 during the renovation of the old Richmond County Courthouse provides perhaps the most chilling insight into Eliza Henderson's character and motivations. Written by Henderson to an unidentified business associate in Baltimore and never sent, the letter lays bare the philosophy that drove her operation. What my late husband never understood, and what society at large fails to comprehend, is that true power lies not in adhering to systems, but in exploiting them. The peculiar institution of our region provided me with the perfect mechanism, people rendered invisible by law, whose skills and labor could be directed toward enterprises that exist in the shadows between legitimate commerce and criminal conspiracy. I have built an empire not by breaking the rules that govern our society, but by understanding that these rules were created to benefit those with the intelligence and determination to manipulate them. Jonathan saw only cotton and the wealth it could bring. I saw human capital and the unlimited potential it offered when properly harnessed and directed. The letter continues, revealing a coldly calculating mind. If I have succeeded where others would falter, it is because I recognized early that sentiment is the enemy of progress. Attachment, affection, moral consideration, these are indulgences that weaken resolve and limit vision. I have no use for them. Each decision I make serves a single purpose, the expansion of my interests. Those who prove useful are maintained. Those who become obstacles are eliminated. The simplicity of this approach has served me well. Most revealing is the letter's conclusion, where Henderson reflects on her position as a woman in Southern society. My gender, which most would consider a limitation, has proved advantageous. A widow is simultaneously pitied and overlooked. Behind the veil of mourning, I move through society virtually invisible, my ambitions and methods undetected, because none expect them from a woman. Men reveal their vulnerabilities freely in my presence, assuming I lack the capacity to exploit them. Their underestimation is my greatest asset. The discovery of this letter, along with financial records and witness testimonies, allowed historians to reconstruct the full scope of the Henderson criminal enterprise. By the early 1850s, it had expanded beyond counterfeiting and document forgery to include an extensive blackmail operation targeting prominent citizens throughout Georgia and neighboring states. A ledger discovered in a hidden compartment in Henderson's Augusta office, cataloged as personal accounts and recovered by Treasury agents in 1872, contained meticulous records of compromising information gathered on judges, politicians, bank officials, and business leaders. The information ranged from financial improprieties to personal indiscretions, each entry accompanied by notations about how the information had been obtained and how it had been leveraged to benefit Henderson's interests. Perhaps most ingenious was Henderson's method of gathering such information. According to testimony from Isaiah Johnson and other former Henderson workers who escaped north, She maintained a network of informants placed in strategic positions throughout Augusta society: house servants in prominent homes, clerks in government offices, workers in hotels, frequented by traveling businessmen. These individuals, chosen for their intelligence and ability to remain inconspicuous, reported directly to Henderson through a carefully constructed system of intermediaries. Johnson described the operation in his 1868 testimony. Mrs. Henderson selected those who could move about unnoticed, who could read and listen while appearing illiterate and deaf. They were trained to recognize valuable information, business discussions, political arrangements, personal secrets. Those placed in households were instructed to examine correspondence, financial records, anything that might reveal vulnerabilities. The information was passed to Mrs. Henderson through a chain that ensured no direct connection could be established. Rewards for valuable intelligence were substantial. Failure to produce resulted in return to the workshops or worse. This intelligence-gathering operation allowed Henderson to anticipate market changes, avoid regulatory scrutiny, and exert influence over individuals who might otherwise have interfered with her businesses. The effectiveness of this approach is evidenced by how rarely her operations faced official investigation, despite their scale and duration. Henderson's skill in financial management was equally sophisticated. Analysis of banking records from the period reveals a complex network of accounts, investments, and property holdings designed to obscure the source and extent of her wealth. She maintained separate financial identities in different cities, conducting transactions through intermediaries and shell companies, decades before such practices became common in organized crime. A journal kept by Frederick Morton, a bank manager in Savannah who handled some of Henderson's legitimate transactions, contains observations that hint at the complexity of her financial operations. Mrs. Henderson's understanding of banking systems exceeds that of most financiers I have encountered, Morton wrote in 1854. She moves capital through channels that render it virtually untraceable, emerging in different forms in unexpected locations. When I once inquired about a particularly complex transaction, she regarded me with those penetrating eyes and said, "Mr. Morton, money is merely information expressed as currency. Control the information, and you control the currency." I found the statement both profound and somewhat unsettling. Historians and psychologists who have studied the Henderson case suggest that Eliza Henderson represents a rare example of what would now be classified as a female sociopath operating within the particular moral vacuum created by the slave economy of the antebellum South. Her business acumen, while extraordinary, was paired with an apparent absence of empathy that allowed her to view human beings purely as tools for wealth accumulation. Dr. Elizabeth Warner, a historian specializing in criminal enterprises of the 19th century, noted in a 1978 analysis of the Henderson case, "What distinguishes Henderson from other historical figures engaged in similar activities was the complete integration of legitimate and criminal operations. Her cotton business was genuinely successful. Her manufacturing enterprises produced quality goods. Her investments showed remarkable acumen. The criminal aspects, counterfeiting, forgery, blackmail, operated within this legitimate framework so seamlessly that they were virtually indistinguishable. This integration provided not only effective cover, but also multiple channels for laundering criminal proceeds into legitimate wealth. What makes the case particularly disturbing is how effectively she operated within the legitimate business community while simultaneously building a criminal enterprise. Her gender, which might have been a disadvantage in normal business operations of the era, became an asset in avoiding scrutiny. Few suspected that a widow in perpetual mourning could orchestrate operations of such complexity and callousness. The question of how Eliza Henderson developed such sophisticated criminal methodology remains unanswered. The limited information about her early life provides few clues. Born Eliza Blackwood in Savannah in 1812, she was educated at a respected ladies' seminary in Charleston, where records indicate she excelled in mathematics and languages. Her father's shipping business exposed her to commercial operations from an early age, though there is no indication that Maxwell Blackwood engaged in illegal activities before his financial ruin in 1837. A tantalizing clue appears in correspondence between Maxwell Blackwood and a business associate in 1835, preserved in the Savannah Maritime Collection. Blackwood wrote, "My daughter continues to display an unsettling interest in commercial matters, spending hours reviewing shipping manifests and customs declarations, rather than engaging in pursuits appropriate to a young lady of her station. Her questions regarding financial transactions reveal an understanding that would be impressive in a seasoned merchant, let alone a girl of 23. I confess some concern about her intense focus on such matters to the exclusion of social accomplishments that might secure her future through an advantageous match." The financial panic of 1837 decimated the Blackwood fortune, forcing the hasty arrangement of Eliza's marriage to Jonathan Henderson, a widower 20 years her senior seeking a wife to manage his household. What neither Blackwood nor Henderson could have anticipated was how Eliza would transform this apparent setback into an opportunity to access wealth and resources beyond what would have been available to her as merely a shipping merchant's daughter. The physical evidence of Eliza Henderson's crimes largely vanished during Reconstruction. The main estate house burned in 1866, destroying whatever secrets remained there. The Augusta warehouse was repurposed, its interior completely renovated. The human toll of her enterprise, the enslaved workers forced to participate in illegal activities, the business associates who disappeared, the legitimate merchants ruined by her counterfeit goods, can be estimated only through fragmented records. One account that survived provides particular insight into the human cost of Henderson's operations. In 1870, a journalist from the New York Tribune interviewed Thomas Carter, who had been purchased by Henderson in 1845 and assigned to the document forgery workshop. Carter, who escaped north during the chaos of the war's end, described conditions in the workshops. "We worked 16 hours each day, every day, with no respite even on Sundays. Each person had a specific task: preparing paper, mixing inks, engraving plates, printing documents. No one knew the full process except Mrs. Henderson herself and the overseer, Mr. Wright. Those who failed to meet daily quotas were taken to what we called the accounting room in the basement of the main house. What happened there, no one spoke of, but those who returned worked faster despite their injuries. Some never returned at all." Carter's account continued with a description of the psychological methods Henderson employed. "She would inspect our work each evening, moving through the workshop in silence, examining each piece with those cold eyes. She rarely spoke, but her presence was felt like a weight on the chest. When she did speak, it was with a precision that could cut like a knife. 'Your work today shows improvement, Thomas,' she might say, 'which proves your previous failures were due to obstinance rather than incapacity. Remember that when you contemplate disappointing me tomorrow.' The next day you would work until your fingers bled rather than risk her disappointment." What survived most completely were the financial echoes of her operation. Banking records traced by Treasury Department investigators in 1871 revealed Henderson assets in accounts across the United States and Europe. The investigation estimated that the total value of her estate at the time of her death would equal approximately $20 million in today's currency, an astronomical sum for the period and one impossible to accumulate through legitimate cotton production alone. Particularly notable was the investigation's finding that Henderson had begun transferring assets to European banks as early as 1860, anticipating the financial upheaval that would accompany the Civil War. By the time of her death in 1865, substantial portions of her wealth were secured in London, Paris, and Swiss accounts under various names and corporate entities, beyond the reach of American authorities or the economic collapse of the Confederacy. Treasury investigator Robert Langford wrote in his 1871 report, "Mrs. Henderson displayed financial foresight that would distinguish even the most prescient banker. While many Southern planters and businessmen saw their fortunes evaporate with Confederate defeat, Henderson had methodically insulated her wealth from the conflict's outcome. More remarkable still was her ability to maintain parallel financial identities in multiple locations, each apparently legitimate to local institutions, yet connected through a complex web of transfers and investments that obscured their common source. The sophistication of these arrangements suggests knowledge of banking operations far beyond what would be expected of even an exceptional businesswoman of her era. Perhaps the final disturbing note in the Eliza Henderson case comes from a deathbed confession recorded by a Presbyterian minister in Savannah in 1879. The confessor, identified only as a former employee of the Henderson estate, claimed that Jonathan Henderson's death was not due to natural causes as officially recorded. She poisoned him slowly, the confessor stated, added something to his evening bourbon over months until his heart gave out. I mixed the drinks myself under her instruction, not knowing then what she was doing. She watched him decline with such patience, such calculation. Never once did she show concern or grief. When he finally died at his desk, she simply instructed us to send for the doctor and began reviewing the estate ledgers before his body was even removed from the house. The confession included details that lent it credibility. Mr. Henderson complained of palpitations beginning in September of 1843. By December, he struggled to climb the stairs to his bedroom. In January, his hands trembled so severely that he could barely sign documents. Mrs. Henderson insisted on preparing his evening bourbon herself during this period, adding what she described as medicinal bitters to ease his symptoms. The night he died, she had instructed me to build an unusually large fire in his study, despite the mild evening. When questioned, she stated that he had been feeling chilled of late, creating conditions that would accelerate his already weakened heart toward failure. This confession, while impossible to verify medically given the limitations of forensic science in the 19th century, aligns with the calculating nature revealed in Henderson's own writings. If true, it suggests that her criminal enterprise began not with her inheritance, but with the carefully planned elimination of her husband to gain control of his assets. Subsequent investigations by historians have uncovered circumstantial evidence supporting the poisoning theory. Pharmacy records from Augusta show that Eliza Henderson purchased significant quantities of digitalis in the months preceding her husband's death. While digitalis had legitimate medicinal uses for certain heart conditions, it could also induce symptoms consistent with heart failure when administered in gradually increasing doses over time. Precisely the pattern of decline described in Jonathan Henderson's case. More telling still was a notation found in Eliza's personal journal, recovered from a safe deposit box in a New York bank in 1902. Jay's condition progresses as anticipated. Dr. Hayes remains convinced that the natural weakening of the heart explains all symptoms. 2 more weeks should bring matters to conclusion. The entry, dated January 4, 1844, approximately 2 weeks before Jonathan's death, suggests a calculated timeline for his demise. The story of Eliza Henderson remains relatively unknown outside academic circles studying criminal history or the economics of slavery. Perhaps this obscurity is fitting. In life, she operated in shadows, her true activities hidden behind the facade of legitimate business and the social expectations of widowhood. In death and historical memory, she continues to exist primarily in fragments, in archived documents, in scattered testimonies, in the gaps between official records and witnessed realities. What makes her story particularly disturbing is not merely the criminal nature of her enterprise or even its scale, but the environment that allowed it to flourish. The legal and social structures of the antebellum South, built around the dehumanization of enslaved people, created the perfect conditions for someone with Henderson's particular psychology to operate undetected. Her crimes, while extraordinary in their scope and calculation, were in many ways an extension of the exploitation already sanctioned by society. A historian writing in the Journal of Southern Legal History in 1985 observed, Henderson's criminal innovation was not in creating new forms of exploitation, but in redirecting and intensifying existing systems. The plantation economy had already established the framework, human beings valued as productive assets, their labor extracted through force, their status as property, rather than persons enshrined in law. Henderson merely applied this existing framework to criminal production rather than agricultural, recognizing that human capital could generate greater returns when directed toward forgery and counterfeiting than cotton cultivation. The moral framework that permitted one form of exploitation provided ample room for the other. Visitors to Augusta today will find no historical markers commemorating Eliza Henderson. The sites of her operations have been built over, repurposed, or lost to time. Yet, in archives and historical collections, the documentary evidence of her existence and her crimes remains. Ledgers recording transactions in a precise hand, property deeds bearing her signature, shipping manifests listing cargo with intentionally vague descriptions, and the scattered testimonies of those who glimpsed the true nature of the Henderson enterprise and lived to record their observations. The only physical artifact definitively connected to Eliza Henderson herself is the silver locket, mentioned by several witnesses, recovered from the ruins of the estate house after the 1866 fire, and now preserved in the Georgia Historical Society collection. When opened, the locket contains not a portrait or lock of hair as might be expected, but a small, precisely folded piece of paper. Written on it in minute script is a single phrase: "Sentiment is weakness." Whether this represented a personal philosophy or a reminder remains open to interpretation, but it aligns perfectly with the calculating nature revealed in her business operations and personal writings. The widow who turned her husband's inheritance into a slave-driven criminal empire disappeared into history, but the methods she pioneered, the exploitation of legal loopholes, the laundering of criminal proceeds through legitimate business, the vertical integration of illegal production, would be replicated by criminal organizations for generations to come. In this sense, Eliza Henderson was not merely a criminal, but an innovator whose legacy continued long after her name was forgotten. Financial historian Margaret Cranford, in her 2006 analysis of the Henderson operation, noted, "What distinguishes Henderson's criminal enterprise from contemporaneous examples was its sophisticated understanding of financial systems beyond her immediate environment. Her use of legitimate commerce as both cover and laundering mechanism for criminal proceeds established a template that organized crime would follow for generations, and perhaps somewhere in Georgia, in a bank vault or a university archive or a family attic, additional records of the Henderson operation wait to be discovered, ledgers or letters or legal documents that might fill the remaining gaps in our understanding of one of the most disturbing criminal minds of the 19th century. While most criminal operations of the era were essentially local, Henderson created international channels for moving capital that anticipated techniques not commonly seen until the early 20th century. The fragmentary nature of the evidence has led to ongoing debate among historians about the full extent of Henderson's crimes and their impact on the region's economy. Some scholars argue that the distribution of counterfeit currency and fraudulent legal documents throughout the Southeast may have contributed to financial instability in the years preceding the Civil War, creating economic ripples that extended far beyond Augusta. As one historian noted in reviewing the Henderson case in 1968, what makes this woman's crimes particularly chilling is not their nature, but their perfect alignment with the accepted practices of her time and place. She did not merely break laws, she exploited a system already built on human exploitation. In doing so, she held a mirror to the moral bankruptcy at the heart of the antebellum economy. The true horror of Eliza Henderson is not that she was a monster operating outside society's norms, but that she was the logical conclusion of those norms taken to their extreme. The case continues to attract scholarly attention, not only for its historical significance, but also for what it reveals about gender, power, and criminality in the antebellum South. Henderson operated in a society that severely restricted women's economic and legal autonomy, yet managed to build a criminal empire that rivaled those created by men with far fewer social constraints. Her methods, using societal expectations of female behavior as camouflage, leveraging the invisibility afforded to widows in mourning, exploiting the assumption that women lacked both the capacity and inclination for complex financial operations, demonstrate a profound understanding of social psychology applied to criminal ends. Psychology professor Dr. Rebecca Thornton, who studied the Henderson case as part of broader research on female criminality in historical contexts, observed Henderson's most remarkable achievement was her ability to operate within a society that severely restricted female autonomy while simultaneously exploiting the blind spots in that society's perception of women. She understood that the very limitations placed on women created opportunities for those willing to work within those constraints while violating their underlying assumptions. The mourning widow was expected to be passive, dependent, and focused on domestic matters. Behind this facade, Henderson built an enterprise that few men of her era could have matched in scope or sophistication. The Henderson case also raises disturbing questions about how historical narratives are constructed and which stories are preserved. Had Henderson been male, her criminal enterprise might have become legendary, the subject of books and historical studies. Instead, her story remained fragmented in archives, emerging piece by piece over more than a century through the efforts of researchers piecing together documents, testimonies, and physical evidence from dozens of sources. In this fragmentation lies perhaps the final disturbing aspect of the Henderson case, the recognition that other such stories likely remain undiscovered, hidden in archives or lost to time, their full impact on historical events unrecognized. How many other Eliza Hendersons might have operated in the shadows of history, their actions felt but their names unrecorded? As one archivist at the Georgia Historical Society noted, when the Henderson papers were finally cataloged in 1996, this collection represents decades of scholarly detective work, assembling fragments from dozens of sources to create a coherent picture of an operation that should have been impossible to conceal given its scale. That it remained hidden in plain sight for so long, documented only in scattered records and testimonies, suggests how many other significant historical actors and events might lie undiscovered in our archives, their stories waiting to be pieced together. The story of Eliza Henderson, the widow who transformed an inheritance into a criminal empire, serves as a reminder of how history itself can become complicit in concealment, how the expectations and assumptions of an era can render certain actors and actions nearly invisible, their impact felt, but their presence unrecorded. In piecing together her story from fragments, historians have not only reconstructed a remarkable criminal enterprise, but also illuminated the blind spots in our understanding of the past. And in the silence that still surrounds much of the Henderson operation, in the gaps between documents, in the questions that remain unanswered, in the victims whose names were never recorded, we confront perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this historical case. The recognition that the most perfect crimes are those that disappear almost completely from historical memory, leaving behind only echoes and fragments that hint at what once existed in the shadows.